Chrissy boy, what's happening, my man?
Not much, man. What's going on?
Nah, not too much. Welcome to the relaunch of the StrengthLab podcast. We've done how many episodes have we done, bro, before?
It sort of blurs because we did so many lives that I sort of like, oh, they could have easily been podcasts as well. So
Yeah.
we did a few episodes. We must have done at least like five.
Yeah, I think we've done probably around five. We've covered a few like shows and stuff like that, and then we've done a bunch of lives on Instagram, which kind of, I guess, were unofficial podcasts. But yeah, we thought we'd bring it back because we've got a lot to
Big one.
say, and I hate short form content because I can never fucking fit it into 90 seconds. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more
So we need to really dive in, go in
there's a
deep.
lot more to talk about, yeah. And there's a lot of nuances to things I think that you just can't get from short form content. So we'll bring back the podcast. We've got so much shit to talk about, dude. Like,
We literally got content planned for the whole year.
yeah, pretty much. And today we're going to be talking about how to make fat loss effortless. Because I think although a lot of people try to simplify the fat loss process, we've got so many influencers and fucking people on Instagram just touting calorie deficit, that's all you need. But which is I'm not saying that's wrong. It's not wrong, but I'm just saying people.
It's clickbait, right? It's 90-second clickbait, or even less these days. It's like 20-second clickbait. How much can you fit into the smallest time frame to capture the person's attention? But
Yeah,
that leaves you
100%.
with nothing.
100%. But I think like if it was so simple, we wouldn't have such an overweight population.
Very true.
And it just proves that it's not as simple as just eating less and moving more, although that will, I guess, help, but it's not going to solve your problem. And especially if you're trying to get down to like, reasonably low levels of body fat, then it takes, a little bit of intervention in terms of getting your diet structured correctly, getting your training structured correctly. And yeah, just so you can make it the whole process as easy as possible for yourself.
I think like the suffering gets touted as being like, I have to suffer, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
like, yeah, sure, there's going to be an element of when you're pushing fat loss, you're going to have to accept, yeah, you're probably going to be hungry, maybe some, changes in your sleep patterns, just little things like that. But it doesn't have to be like, I'm absolutely starving 100% of the time, right?
Yep, yep, yep. All right. So kick us off in your opinion, how do we make the fat loss process as easy and efficient as possible? I guess so people can consistently lose body fat every week and finally kind of get to their end goal. Because I think that's the main problem is like people start and then they stop. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
this things get too hard or whatever it is, they're sticking to a plan that they can't, that's not sustainable or whatever. So what do you think are the main drivers for making fat loss way more effortless?
Yeah. Well, I think if we boil it, it boils down straight back to, right, if we just look at our macronutrients to start with, right? So our protein, carbs, and fats, and we sort of sift through what we feel like is obviously going to be important. So I think the biggest one that, people will sort of be on the fence about these days, with the rise of like, oh, carnivore diets and all this sort of shit, that sort of just keeps cropping up, is carbohydrates are like the enemy, right?
Mm.
We don't eat that. It's just protein and fat. And yeah, look, that might work to a degree, but the reality is you're probably going to be standing there at the end with little to no muscle mass left over, right?
Yeah.
We know that we do need carbohydrates. Obviously they're our primary energy substrate for, the resistance training that we do in the gym. And yeah, your body obviously can go through processes to utilize fats and things of that nature, but it's a less efficient process than it is using glucose. So, if we're looking at, we, basically boil it down to just like, where we're looking at, simple versus sort of complex carbohydrates. I think that when we're looking at, that topic in particular, we want to be gravitating more towards obviously complex carbohydrates, right? Like everyone knows that nutrient dense sort of whole foods. The more shit that we sort of try and fill our diet with, likely we're going to be really, really hungry. And a lot of the time, those carbohydrate sources, particularly more of the simple ones, they're going to be more calorie dense, right? So essentially, when it comes to making fat loss effortless, we essentially want to be picking foods that are going to list quite highly on a satiety scale, so that we feel quite full when we're obviously eating those foods. So we want to be gravitating more towards those carbohydrates that are a bit more complex in nature, right? So things like your sweet potatoes, your potatoes, your those sorts of things, and vegetables, fruit, and things of that nature. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think the number one reason why people fuck up their nutrition when it comes to fat loss is just the fact that they're number one trying to follow a diet that's so far from what they would usually eat on a daily basis. Um, so that it just becomes so hard and so unsustainable to follow. And just going back to what you're saying, like with fad diets, people trying to just cut out food groups, really heavily restrict what they eat in terms of food choices and stuff like that. I think that's one of the main problems that I see, because people try to they, they think that they need to overhaul the whole process in order to drop body fat. And it's like this mentality that they just need to like kind of like go hard. And I think that just comes from them like always being on or off in terms of what they're what they're doing. Like they're either 100% on and they're trying to go to some sort of extreme with their diet because they've been fucking up like, all of the week prior and the week prior to that. So then when they get back on their diet, they try to go with such force that they're trying to undo all the fucking bad shit that they've been doing. And it just puts them into like a cycle where they're just kind of heavily restricting and then binging or yo-yoing or whatever it is. So I think if people can just take a bit more of a moderate approach to the whole dieting process and actually keep it reasonably close to what they would eat on a given normal day, including all your food groups, having the foods that you love within your diet, and yeah, then taking into account what you were saying. So high satiety foods, high nutrient dense foods, foods that are going to keep you fuller for longer and just make the whole process as easy as possible. I think if you're veering away from that sort of stuff and trying to go to extremes, you're just going to run into massive problems. There's no way, like, look, the average person needs to lose. Man, look, the average person that works with us probably loses.
All the time. How many times do we see people come in that just they probably only need to take off 10, 15, maybe even 20 kilos in some cases, but they end up going so hard with the first 5 that now they've ruined the process and end up putting back on 10. And they just go through this lifespan of perpetual dieting. And it's like they never just really like have a phase where it's like, oh, I'm actually going to diet for 12, 16 weeks, have a targeted rate of loss that I'm going to go with every week. That's something that I feel like I can stick to, that's not going to completely mess with me. And I'm going to just start binging and going out. And they just end up going through that sort of same perpetual cycle over a lifetime.
Exactly. Because I think like when I look at when I see all the results come through for our clients, most of our clients lose between like 8 and 30 kilos on average, I would say. So say, the average person loses 15 kilos. You need to be able to set up a nutrition approach that is going to be able to that's going to allow you to be consistent to lose body fat throughout that whole period of time. This is not a month. It's not going to take a month to get that 15 kilos off. So if you're taking an approach that you can only stick to for a fucking month,
there's only so much you can do in a month, right?
there's only so much you can do in a month. That's right. And people, like, the thing is, like, people think by going to extremes and trying to lose the body fat as fast as possible, you're not actually going to lose that much more body fat doing that. There's only so much body fat you're going to lose in a week or a month or whatever it is, effectively, while maintaining muscle and keeping, like, metabolic markers in a good place. And the extremes that people try to go to lose fat faster, there's just basically like the ROI is not there in terms of how hard it's going to be to follow and the chances of you falling off the diet within the first month. And that's why people, yeah, they lose that first 5 kilos of the 15 or 20 that they need to lose, and then they just fucking gain it back and potentially more every single fucking time. It's like it's literally just a merry-go-round. It just keeps going around and around. And that's, I mean,
They always think it's going to be a different result every time too. They don't ever think, oh, what if I just try a slightly less aggressive approach? It's like even some people will just have like they might have the right mindset when they go into it. They might like start and think, oh, I just want to start aggressive to get me going.
Yep.
But they don't have the skill set or the tools or the knowledge to understand, okay, if I'm going to do that, well, after the first 4 weeks, how am I actually going to slow that down? Like, okay, I'm going to add in a cheat meal, they might say.
Yep.
Right. And then that cheat meal becomes 2 days and they're over consuming by so many calories, they're just negating the weekly deficit. And they wonder why that the fat loss is stalled. Right.
Yeah.
And I think unless you're working with a coach who understands, a lot of the fundamental principles of what you're trying to achieve, you probably are always better off going with a more modest approach and a modest rate of loss rather than trying to just pull off kilos and kilos and kilos in the first few weeks.
Yeah. It's like saving money, man. You're not gonna save a fortune in a month. Do you know what I mean? It's a over time compounding. You put in a little bit each week, and then it kind of all just ends up stacking up. And then 12 weeks down the track, you look back and you're in amazing shape, or you have more wealth or whatever it is. And I think that's the power also of just having a coach, because I know a lot of clients that I'm working with at the moment have done all that stuff. Like when I do their initial
The
consult.
most common thing we see when we do a consult with one of our clients, right, is like they've done that exact same thing year after year after year, but it's sort of like packaged differently. It'll be like,
Yeah,
I did this diet, and I did this diet,
yeah,
and then I did this diet. It's the same shit, just packaged differently.
100%. And so the power of having a coach to pace the whole phase really makes a difference. And then just setting the expectation every week. If a client loses half a kilo, they're losing a centimeter off the waist, the photos are improving each week. It's just like this, we are moving at a good rate of loss right now. And just kind of setting that pace for the client, and letting them understand that these are good targets that we're hitting each week. We are making progress every single week.
Right? I'm sure you get pushback too, right? It's like a client might have lost 500 grams, 600 grams, 700 grams. They're like, oh, no weight came off this week, nothing shifted. But like
Yeah,
you said, managing your expectations around that is so important because that is a great week of fat loss in our eyes, right?
100%. And I think also like like I've got a few clients now that are they're they've got most of the puppy fat off now. So it's like, they're actually getting reasonably lean. And some weeks they don't really drop that much on the scales.
But visually, they look way different, right?
Visually, they look a lot better. I had a client this week, my man Matty. I love working with Matty. Um, he actually, I mean, he's been great. I've been working with him for like maybe like 8 to 10 weeks, and he's looking incredible. And this week he was away. He was on a business trip somewhere, but he's generally pretty good with the nutrition and stuff like that. But he didn't drop any weight on the scales, and he actually hasn't dropped any weight on the scales. It's been just bouncing around like within a kilo range for probably 2 to 3 weeks. But every week his photos have been going crazy, like progress wise. And this week was like the first week. Um, we actually like saw his abs come out in the progress photos. Um, so yeah, it's just one of those things you can't just take weight into account. You got to look at other.
Data points, right?
You got
Because,
to
like
have
I said, if
multiple
you're
data
just going
points.
off weight, you'd be like, nah, mate, we've got to drop calories here. We've got to make some changes. But you're combining, obviously, the photos and the visuals combined with, I know you do like a waist measurement as well. And also, photos, which are the most important thing, right? And if
Yeah,
you're noticing those things are obviously changing, then obviously, and, a lesser coach might be like, oh, let's make a change when no change is really needed.
exactly. And I think like more to that point, when someone doesn't even have a coach, then they just start making emotional decisions. Like, they don't.
I mean, if you are going to coach yourself, you should have like a week where it's like, I make the change. I do not make a change until that next week rolls around where I do a check in for myself or something like that. Right.
Yeah,
Because, like, how often, even I've been guilty of it in the past too. Like if I'm sort of going through phases where, maybe in my earlier days where I was coaching myself, I would be like, oh, half the week's gone, but nothing's really shifting here. I need to make a change. And you need to have these hard and fast rules with yourself that it's like, okay, I just need to give it a little bit more time, make sure that we're making consistent changes, not just based off an emotional whim, where it's like, or what else people will tend to do it, to be like, oh yeah, 5 days in, weight's shifting really well. I think I need a refeed.
Yeah.
And they give themselves this refeed or a cheat meal, and then they wonder why things are not continuing to push in the right direction.
100%. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it's just about pacing it right, setting expectations, and then getting the diet structured correctly so that it does make it as easy as possible for you to follow and execute over a long period of time. And that's the main key. It needs to be something that makes it easy for you to execute over the long term. A lot of people do, like these overly restrictive diets and fad diets where they're, cutting out all this shit. And it might be reasonably easy for the first few weeks, but
that's
it's
a good
not,
thing, right? Like you want to ease in most cases. You don't just want to go, all right, now I'm feeling like shit straight off the bat. You want to ease in nice and slowly. And yeah, obviously when I say slowly, I don't mean you don't want to see anything happening. You definitely want to see scale shifting, but you don't just want to find yourself in a position where you're making these emotional decisions. And unfortunately you find yourself in a world of hurt after you've only been dieting for like 4 or 6 weeks and you fall off the rails entirely.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper and get into what exactly should people be doing if they want to make the dieting process easier. Let's talk about our macro sources. So looking at protein, fats, and carbs, and what we should be doing with protein, fats, and carbs if we want to make the whole process a lot easier.
So I think obviously when we're looking at each macro, yes, we can look at them from the perspective of they all, equate to energy. They're all essentially calories, but we know we want to probably be having protein on the higher side, fat, on the moderate to probably lower side, and then carbohydrates on the moderate to higher side, right?
Yep.
And the main reason, obviously, having those, carbohydrates, like we said, a big portion of them, you're going to have, soluble and insoluble fiber, which, add more bolus to sort of the gastrointestinal tract and, help with obviously the perception of perceived fullness, right?
Yep.
Obviously, we need protein intake in there, to sort of facilitate muscle recovery and, ensure that we're not breaking down muscle too much. Obviously, if protein's too low, you're probably not going to recover from your sessions or be maintaining a lot of the tissue that you've worked so hard to build over the years. And I think it's fat intake, obviously, we don't probably want to take it too high or too low. I think a pretty good moderate amount of that is good, just because, it does obviously slow digestive function down a little bit as well, which is, sort of what we want if we've got like balanced meals, right? Which is another reason why I think snacking within a diet is probably not a good thing. We want to be having sort of a set 3, 4, 5 meals a day where we've got, a decent amount of protein, a modest amount of fat and a decent amount of carbs in each meal.
So balance.
Yeah, balance. And I guess for yourself, what does that balance look like for you? Like in terms of, some numbers, some, ratios, things like that you would set with your clients that you think would work quite well during a diet?
Pretty similar to what you said. Like I try to, we want to get protein as high as possible, not as high as possible, but to a good level where we are, maximizing, protein synthesis and recovery and muscle growth and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, protein is going to really help with satiation as well. We know that it's one of the most important things. So getting a good amount of protein in a meal, and I guess it's going to depend on how many meals the person's having and, what their actual specific protein requirements are. But essentially, we want to be looking at, okay, so if the person's having 4 meals and they're, say we're trying to hit 200 grams of protein, then we want to divide that reasonably evenly throughout the meals. And then I think fat is one of the things where we don't want to be overeating on fats, because if we do have too much fat in the diet, that's going to it's going to not allow us to eat the maximal amount of carbohydrates. that we could potentially eat. So as long as we're covering our bases with our fats, we are getting a decent amount of fat in the diet, just to help slow digestion as well, but also just to cover our bases hormone wise, all that sort of stuff. And then using carbohydrates as well for satiation, because I think they're going to be an amazing thing for keeping you full. I think when you start to, like we were talking about before, if you start to eliminate carbohydrates, you're going to feel pretty hungry, even if you do increase the fats, a reasonable amount. So it's just about balancing. But when we're looking at meals, in terms of percentages, I'm not 100% sure, but I would say, look, at least 30 grams of protein in a meal.
I would say, yeah, well, I would agree with that. Sort of depending on obviously the size of the person, smaller females, lesser protein requirements. Like I would say the range of probably like maybe 25 grams to 50 grams of protein per meal for most people.
Yep.
Obviously, if you're a larger individual, protein's typically weighted per kilogram of body weight. So if you're a smaller individual, you probably want to opt for the lower side of that. If you're a heavier individual, probably towards the higher side of that. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of the range, I guess, that you sort of fluctuate?
100%. Yeah. Look, it's going to come down to the specific person's requirements and how many feedings they're actually having, but it's going to be generally somewhere between 25 and 50. Again, carbs is a similar story because, it's going to be based off their energy requirements and what's left after you kind of work out their protein and fat. But yeah, I would say if someone's, I would say probably around the same, like 25 to 50. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Like, look, I think 90% of people, that I obviously coach, most females are probably going to be, again, if they weigh somewhere between sort of 55 and say 70 kilos, they're probably going to be on around 110 to 140 grams of protein, mostly, right? Most guys that, can range sort of anywhere between, I guess, 80 kilos or 75 kilos, all the way up to 110 for some of the bigger guys that I coach. Like they're obviously in a ballpark between, I guess, 170 or 160 all the way up to 250, 275, Yeah. I'd say there's a big range there, but I think the most important thing to understand with that range is, again, you have to take your individual protein requirements and take what you've been currently eating as well, obviously, into account. But I think that probably range would suit best for most people. I know it's a big range, but at the same time, we can't just give, blanket numbers and then obviously follow them because, everyone's going to be slightly different in terms of their requirements.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think the power of fats are when it comes to making the dieting process easy? Is it just slowing down the digestion process, or do you think, just fiber and carbs can do that job, or do you think there is power in having fat in there?
Yeah. So again, too, when it comes to males and females, this is going to differ slightly. I feel that obviously hormone synthesis for females is quite obviously important, which is why I probably tend to edge a little bit closer or a little bit higher on the fat intake side for females. Males can go a little bit lower. I feel like, as long as you're not going too low and bottoming out. And I think probably, for most people under, 0.5 per gram per kilogram of body weight for fat intake is like anything below that. If you're, or also as well, energy availability is going to impact hormonal disruption as well, right? So, for example, we'll see probably a decent decline, like in our natural bodybuilders, for example, we'll see a big decline in testosterone towards the back end of the diet. Now, you can make the argument, is that because of fat intake, or is that because of just lack of energy availability and the level of conditioning that they're now in?
Yeah.
So I think as long as with fats, yes, it does definitely aid in digestion. You can find this out yourself, right? Like if you were to eat a bowl of cereal, with nothing else, right? Maybe a little bit of milk, you have a bit of protein there, or skim milk or something like that has like minimal to no fat in it. You will feel very hungry within like the next few hours, right? Or even the next hour. You add in like a scoop of nut butter or almond butter or something like that. It'll slow the digestion down of those carbohydrates, which will obviously, help with those feelings of fullness. So I think that's why it's important if you're constructing your own meal plan that you're not just like willy-nilly thinking about tracking macros as per se. You still need to like, divvy your fat intake up over like, say, however many meals you're having. That might be 3, that might be 4, that might be 5. If your fat intake is, 50 grams per day and you're, I don't know, let's just say you're a female, you're having 5 meals, you just put 10 grams of fat on each meal, I think that really sets it well. And then you can have a nice balanced meal for each and every meal that you're having from a fat intake standpoint. Obviously, carbohydrates are going to be the thing that do change because when you are starting to, get a little bit leaner, we really want to be making sure that the time that we're the most full, in my opinion, or the most, satiated or have ready like energy availability is going to be around our training times and around our sleeping times. Yeah. So I think those are probably the two most important times, or even like, pre-workout, post-workout, and, before you go to bed. So with carbohydrate intake, you probably want to be having a little bit more pre-workout, a little bit more post-workout, and just make sure you do have some carbohydrates in your pre-bed meal as well.
Yeah, I agree. I always say, when you're, because inevitably, as you're in a fat loss phase, there is going to be reductions along the track there, and we always want to reduce as a priority and first away from the pre and post workout window, and then secondly away from the evening. I think they're the most powerful times, and should be your priorities to keeping the carbs in those specific meals. So getting, reducing from, or even if carbs get low enough, getting rid of carbohydrates from those other meals would be your first bet. And then as time goes on, if you need to, then you can reduce from around the workout, or even potentially from the evening meal. But trying to keep those meals as high as possible for as long as possible is going to help the most, definitely, with training performance recovery and just overall compliance, especially when it comes to like evening carbohydrate intake.
And yeah, like you said, I think, and again, too, just because there's other meals that are not like necessarily that high in carbohydrates, it doesn't mean that you need to starve during those meals either, right? Mm. Like we talked about the satiety index, right? Like we know, obviously vegetables and your fruits. So, things like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, also with like your, other meals, which are maybe not as carbohydrate dense, if you want to maybe be opting for things like, pumpkin or potato, and then you can also add a ton of vegetables to them, like if you've got a meal that's got like 100 grams of tomato, 100 grams of cucumber, 150 grams of white potato and some chicken, like, and maybe, some iceberg lettuce or something like that. Like that's a voluminous meal that's going to leave you feeling full. Sure, you're not going to be feeling like you've got a ton of energy, but you still won't be like, when it comes to, I guess, the title of this podcast, which was making fat loss effortless. You're going to have to go through some meals where you are feeling a little bit energyless. It doesn't mean that you need to feel hungry all of the time.
Yeah. And I think when you, when you fill your stomach with food, it does obviously send a message to the brain and helps switch off those hunger signals. I think that stretching of the stomach, like when you have a full stomach of food, whether it's fucking lettuce or, whatever, a fucking meat pie, whatever, you're gonna send that message to your brain to say that you're full. So it's really important that you do eat reasonably high volume food so you can get that signal and not feel hungry. And yeah, you might not feel,
amazing. You're not going to be like sharp as a whip.
But like, the hunger is super important, dude. Like, I think that's why a lot of people fail with their nutrition, is because a lot of people don't eat vegetables, bro.
Yeah. And you will, I guarantee you go through a proper diet, whether or not you like vegetables or not at the start, you will learn to love them, because I can tell you, when you're really hungry and you're very, very lean, which obviously we've both, competed in shows before, things like that, you'll eat a fucking plain jacket potato and it'll be like the greatest thing in the world. You know what I mean? Like your hunger sensors and receptors and whatnot, they change. And it's like even the slightest amounts of like little bits of salt on a meal, or, a little bit of seasoning, like you really do change. It's like going from, full sugar soda to diet soda, right? Like, yeah, initially a lot of people will notice, it doesn't taste as good, but after a few weeks or a few months of obviously consuming that, diet soft drink, you don't really notice much of a difference,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if we say we have a 80-kilo guy, all right? Say they're on 200 grams of protein, 50 grams of fat, 200 grams of carbs. They're going to do 4 meals a day. Would you start by just dividing those macros evenly across the 4 meals?
Definitely.
Yeah. And then
I know we talked about, changing your energy requirements around like your training times and sleep times. But when you've got a lot of fat to lose, like you more or less just want to get started, right?
And
And I think the
also,
easiest way to
also
do
like,
that,
yeah, you've got plenty of macros for every meal anyway, so it's not really like there's no limitation at that point, so it's just fine to have an even distribution.
your diet fatigue should be low. So like your training performance shouldn't be really suffering like straight off the get-go. So, like we said before, when you're starting a diet and you're going into initial deficit, it's fine to just distribute those macros evenly. You will know when your strength and performance starts to decline a bit,
Mhm.
that you probably need to put a bit more carbohydrates into those pre and post workout meal. Now, that might not happen for a good 8, 10, 12 weeks in some cases. It really depends on your starting point and how much body fat has to come off versus how lean you're currently getting. Because I guarantee once you get down to a point where you've got abs in, like you will start to notice just an extra 20 or 30 grams of carbohydrates in that pre-workout meal and post-workout meal
Mhm.
versus obviously mixing them around for the day. That really does make a difference once you're lean enough to sort of see that happen.
And I know you've toyed with i- intra intra carbs and even like pre kind of liquid carbs. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think for the normal person, I don't really think it makes that much of a difference because, again, you've got a lot of adipose tissue that you're going to be losing anyway, a lot of fatty tissue. So
Yep.
I don't really think it makes that much of a difference because you still, your energy levels shouldn't be that low.
Yeah.
Just because you've got so much stored body fat as well that you're going to be liberating for energy too. It's not until you're getting down to, single digit body fat probably where you're like, okay, I really notice an extra 20 grams of carbs in my intra workout really helps fuel my training performance,
Mm.
right? That definitely does help. Like I can tell you from, first-hand experience, and we see it all the time with athletes as well in the
Mm.
literature, and also bodybuilders, competitive bodybuilders that we prep, how much of a difference that 15 or 20 grams of carbs intra workout can actually make to
Mm.
their training performance. So I definitely
Do you
think
think it's
that
do you think it's a training endurance thing? Like they can perform for longer, like
100%.
and train longer? Yeah, okay.
Definitely, because you'll notice like if you're very very lean, and you're sort of halfway through a session and you've still got half your session to go, your energy and performance might just start to tail off a bit.
Yeah.
So if you're obviously consuming 15 20 grams of carbs intra, and we do see this time to time in some of the literature as well with like weird like soda mouth rinses and things
Yeah,
like
that's what
that
I was
where
just gonna talk about. I was
it
looking at
actually does improve
yeah,
performance a little
question.
bit. Now how much of that is actually
How
applicable to
cool
the
is
real
that though?
it's cool. You know what I mean? And like if you're, obviously you've got like amylase in your mouth that are obviously secreted in response to carbohydrate. Like carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth just because you obviously secrete an amylase
Mm.
to sort of start breaking it down. So, I'm not 100% certain whether or not, drinking those carbohydrates without actually drinking them and spitting, right?
Mm.
I don't know if that actually contributes to calories in any meaningful way because there's no real absorption that takes place. So
Well,
it's
the thing
definitely an
is, I don't even think it needs to be it needs to be calories from just for you guys that are not following along with us. There's been a couple of studies that have studied rinsing your mouth, during training with some sort of sweet solution, and it's kind of resulted in better performance outcomes from training. And that's just, I think they think it's just to do with the reward response or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's more that drives like a dopaminergic response, like
Yeah.
in the brain.
Yeah. So,
And
but I don't think it naturally needs to be calories. Like it could, like, so say for instance, if you have, I mean, I guess EAAs are calories, but even if it was like sugar-free cordial, say, I think it's just the sweetness in your mouth that is generating that response, right?
yeah,
Which is super interesting because you're not really, yeah. Excuse me, I just got a
I mean,
call.
when it comes to sort of intra workout carbohydrates, like one thing I am a fan of is not just the carbohydrates themselves, because we know like obviously dehydration can play a pretty significant role in performance as well. So especially when it comes to training, like I think both of us are quite a big fan of something like coconut water or something like
Mm.
that intra workout, which you're getting in a decent bolus of potassium as well, which is obviously can help facilitate performance there as well. So like it doesn't necessarily have to just be a glucose based solution. Like obviously a Gatorade or something like that is commonly used, or a Staminade or something like that. But it can be something a little bit more rich in potassium because we know there's a marginal decrease in performance with dehydration. So if we can try and prevent a ton of that water loss, and upregulates the electrolyte balance, potassium. You probably have some sodium in your pre-workout as well, or your pre-workout meal. Like, you're sort of going to be in a great spot to make sure your performance isn't tailing off. Now, I obviously say that as well, just given you do have to be quite lean, but in the scope of obviously this podcast, we also do coach bodybuilders who do get very, very lean. So it's probably an important point to sort of to gloss over there as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And let's just dive a little bit deeper and get more specific with what are your 5 favorite foods for satiety?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of potato, like especially white potato. I think for me, whether or not you actually can sort of change its satiety a little bit in and of itself with the method of cooking as well. So if you're obviously dehydrating it in something like an air fryer, you can still get a decent amount of volume, but you're not taking in the water with it as well. If you were to boil it, say in the microwave, you're going to get a little bit more satiety from that as well. So something I actually do myself when I go through a aggressive fat loss phase or something is I'll change the way I cook my potatoes. Something as simple as going from like an air fried version of potato to boiling it in the microwave, right? Then you're taking in fluid, you're taking in some water with it as well, and it definitely helps with perceived fullness. So potato definitely. I'm just sort of trying to run through my diet at the moment. I'm a big fan of cream of rice, so I still consume quite a bit of cream of rice. You can sort of volumize that with additional water as well. So you'll find a lot of, I think, the satiety foods, they do pull in quite a bit of moisture and fluid in with it as well. I would say oats. That's probably another one I gravitate towards. I know I'm picking carbohydrate sources, but obviously protein, protein powder. One thing obviously I have been using a lot of is my Ninja Creamy as well.
Yeah, I love Ninja
which is pretty cool because you can create like just with 250 mils of almond milk and a scoop of protein, and maybe an Oreo or something, you can create like something that's only 300 250 calories, and you just have it as a little after dinner snack. And I love having some ice cream, so it's sort of like a diet ice cream, but also obviously helps keep me full as well.
And
So
it makes fat loss effortless.
It does, because I'm not really. That's what I mean. Like, yeah, I'm changing my normal diet a little bit, but I might go from eating a bunch of rice to eating potato, right? And then I might go from having, I don't know, a caramel ice cream every night to having my Ninja Creamy every night.
Yeah.
Just like keeping my diet the same as what it was in terms of its general structure, but just changing some of the things to ensure that I'm like, a lot more satiated for the lower calories. Like even with my cream of rice, as opposed to having like maybe, I don't know, blueberries or raspberries, strawberries or something, I might have banana, or I'll have dates or something that is obviously a lot more calorie dense. So it's much easier if you set your diet up and there's not like a complete restructuring of what you've been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for me, in terms of protein sources, I would say
you'll be a great person to ask for this because your calories do have to get quite low. Like mine, like 2.7, I feel like pretty shit. For you have to go quite low. So it's actually a good example of how even for someone at a decently high body weight, like you see your calories have to go quite low. So you'll have some great tips and tricks for the listeners.
Yeah. So I look, I really like eggs and egg whites. I think they're quite satiating. In terms of protein sources, the main protein sources that I'll eat in a fat loss phase will be eggs and egg whites. I'll do.
You making that into an omelet as well?
Yeah. I'll make it into an omelet, or I'll generally make it into an omelet. Yeah. And then I'll do.
Just before we move on, is like how even just changing the cooking method of a food can increase its satiety, right? Because in a gaining phase, I'm the same. I might have boiled eggs, right?
Yep.
Less stomach volume. It's a smaller amount to eat, but then obviously you can make 2 eggs and some egg whites into this massive omelet with a ton of vegetables and stuff in there as well.
Dude, it's crazy. Egg whites are so low in calories, bro. So low in calories. Like it's 100% protein pretty much. So and the volume of a cup of egg whites is it's considerable. So having that. Sorry.
Even add it to foods like oats and things.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Oh, I've done that as well. Like putting it into your oats, maybe instead of like a protein powder or something like that, it just makes it so much more voluminous. So I'll do a lot of them. I eat a fair bit of fish as well, like barramundi I really like. Lean red meat.
kangaroo, bro? You enjoying kangaroo?
I do go through phases where I'll do kangaroo, either burgers or I like the
Sausages?
yeah, I like the sausages as well. And again, they're I mean, they're so lean, dude. So it's a very good source of protein. Um, I'll do extra lean mince and maybe like turkey or chicken breast. Um, and then I like the casein protein, bro. I find that that's pretty satiating as well, and that is more voluminous than just like your normal isolate or whatever, and the calories are really
You getting
marginal.
on the casein custard?
That's all I don't even really eat. I don't even really take like normal protein anymore. Like because I usually have um like I'll have oats in the morning with protein, and I always use the protein custard, the Muscle Nation one, or something similar to that.
But and like obviously a few years ago it was only ever the Gentech custard, right?
Yeah,
The Gentech,
yeah.
but that was good. But then
It's
Muscle
good.
Nation brought in this whole range of like flavored ones, and they actually taste really good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like it makes the meal so much more filling. Um, and like in terms of like a protein, a protein source, it's still a great protein source, dude. It's nice, slow digesting. It's gonna take a while for that to kind of like yeah digest, I guess. So, um, it keeps you full for ages. So I use a lot of that, dude. I actually pretty much solely use that. Unless I have like a shake after training or something like that, then I'll use like a concentrate or an isolate. But generally, 90% of the time, I'm using the casein, and that's kind of like my main protein sources throughout the day. Then, in terms of carbohydrates, yeah, oats. Oh, sorry. Oh, Greek yogurt as well. That's my other main. I'll probably have like eat that once a day. Then in terms of carbs, I'm doing potatoes, I'm doing oats, I'm doing I like the some of the low calorie breads as well. I think they're really good good sources that are very low in calories. And it's kind of like a cool thing to eat, as in like it tastes good. So um it just makes making meals like more enjoyable, I think.
You know what's
Uh,
interesting there? Right? Like we both listed our favorite dieting foods, right?
mm,
And really, not one of us said. Obviously, we both practice like we're counting our macros, whatnot, but not one of us really listed a food that like Tim Tams or you know what I mean.
yeah.
Like we've not listed something that's like going to be a shit food. It's
Yeah.
all high quality, nutrient dense foods, which are going to be great for digestive function. And yeah, I definitely think that it plays a key role because I think a mistake people often make is, oh, I'm just going to track my calories, right? Like a lot of the time, people will
Yeah.
just track calories. They don't worry about their macros, and they end up their food sources are just filled with shit, and they wonder why they're hungry and they're not making any progress.
Yeah, and I think like with all this fucking garbage content on Instagram as well, like you just see everyone fucking doing the same shit.
Off
And
a cutting board, bro? Are you eating off a cutting board?
fuck, bro. And it's just like people saying like, oh, this Snickers has, the same amount of calories as this whatever. And it's just like, but you're not gonna eat. Yeah, okay, maybe every now and then you'll eat a Snickers, but it's like not gonna be a staple part of your diet. That you're going to eat every day. So it's like go for the more nutrient dense thing that's like got healthier ingredients or whatever, because you're just going to feel
It's going
better,
to keep
bro.
you full. It makes you
I,
feel better. And it's going to keep you fuller.
I think I think when you're have a diet that's full of great foods that are nutrient dense, it makes the dieting process easier because you just feel better. You got more energy. You're extracting more nutrients from the fucking food you're eating.
And
Then
I
you
think as well
feel
with the
better.
food, yeah, with the food selection of like the maybe more junky, sugary stuff,
Mm.
you sort of obviously we talked about that dopamine response before. Like those foods, the more you eat them, the more you crave them. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So it's like often people were like, oh yeah, I'll just put this one Tim Tam or two Tim Tams into my intake. Once that packet's open, most people are just going to eat the whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
So like it's one of those things where you do have to be careful with adding those things in because to a degree, you sort of almost want your foods to taste a little bit more bland when you are dieting because it makes the process easier.
100%. And look, I used to be bad like that, but as
I
I've
think
got,
we've both gone through those phases, right? And
yeah,
we've definitely over the years come full circle.
as I've gotten older and matured more, I'm so much more controlled with food now in terms of like I literally am the type of person who can just have like one piece of chocolate or whatever. But Emma, my fiance, she's the complete opposite, bro. If there's like it's not even worth like opening something a lot of the times for me because I'm like, oh fucking I know Emma's just gonna like eat the rest of it and I feel bad for fucking like
And
leaving
that's a
it
good
there.
example because Emma is a fucking champion bikini athlete. So she's obviously a high level competitor. And even she would struggle with like that as well. So imagine just a regular old Joe Blow who's trying to pull off 5 or 10 kilos and
Mm.
they've always had a problem with food. Like high level physique competitors struggle with this stuff. So imagine what the normal person's going to struggle with.
Yeah, exactly. Popcorn's another good one, bro.
Yeah, popcorn's good. I do enjoy a bit of popcorn.
Yeah, popcorn's pretty good, pretty voluminous. Then obviously your vegetables, fruit. In terms of fruit, I eat a lot of strawberry. I think strawberries are like the cheat code, bro.
Yeah, strawberries are good. You can
Dude,
have it with everything.
fucking 250 grams of strawberries is only 80 calories.
I've had them before. I've had strawberries and with egg whites. I've had strawberries. Oh, not like mixing them together, but you'll
Mm.
have them on the side. Like, I think you have to just dismiss the notion of thinking, oh, certain meals have to go together. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like, you can put whatever the fuck you want in any meal. Like, it really doesn't matter. Like, if you want to add some strawberries to your egg whites, or you want to add some strawberries on the side of your potatoes, like, it's no different to having like an apple on the side. It just might be a better option calorie wise to have the strawberries while you're dieting, obviously.
100%, 100%. Do you drink a lot of diet like soft drinks and stuff?
So I tend to try and avoid it a bit,
Mhm.
just because it does sort of mess with my digestion a bit. Right, mixed reviews here. Some people have no problems. Some people have problems. For me, if I have any more than say 600 mils of a diet soda, I do
Yeah.
start to have some digestive problems. But a little bit of a cheat code that me and my fiance Emily have been doing now for probably the last 6 months is we just buy soda water
Yeah.
and we buy diet, right?
Yeah.
And I literally just pour up a cup of soda water and I'll put a little bit of diet right in there. And it tastes, to me, it tastes almost better than a soft drink, to be fair.
Yeah, I do
And
that.
I honestly, if I had Pepsi Max in the fridge, I would probably opt for the soda water and the diet right cordial. Like it's an amazing combo. So a little bit of a tip there for
I
the
fucking
listeners.
love just soda water as well on its own.
Not to mention the price of fucking
Mhm.
soft drinks these days. Like you buy like fucking one carton of like I don't know the Kirk's sugar free I don't know whatever range they've got there, and it's like it could be 10, 12, $15 for those. So um, yeah, I know obviously with a lot of people with the cost of living crunch and all that sort of stuff now. Like there are some good options there if you're willing to get a bit creative.
Yeah, 100%. I don't drink much. Like when if I'm heavy in a fat loss phase, then I'll notice my consumption will go up more than usual, which would be like maybe 1 to 2 cans a day. But uh, if I'm just like in a small deficit or not, I'm not too lean or whatever, and I don't really have like too many cravings. So if I do crack a can, I'll probably like I literally have like 2 sips and then I give it to Emma a lot of the time because she
Bro,
loves
I do that all the time. Like
it.
Emily would always be like, "Why is there this half drunk can?"
Yeah.
I just put it back in the fridge and I'll just like sip on it over a couple of days. Like I don't know, I never really feel I have like a half of it or a quarter, and I'm like, oh, I'll come back to this later. Like I don't really feel like
Yeah,
finishing it.
yeah, yeah. I'm exactly the same. I can't drink too much of it a lot of the time. What about water, Chrissy? Where does
Yeah,
the
so with water,
importance of water come into this sort of stuff? Because you did mention the water content in food, so I'm assuming that just drinking water would also help, right?
yeah, so I think obviously sipping on water in between your meals, can be a pretty handy tool as well. But one thing it actually can do is increase gastric emptying faster.
Hmm.
So if you're sort of trying to get the maximal satiety, you probably should be drinking a lot of water with your meals, not necessarily a ton. How some people will drink like liters and liters in between their meals because they're so hungry.
Yeah.
And all that does is just drive up more diuresis and excretion. And again, too, I talked about the importance of your electrolytes and minerals, sodium, potassium before. Like the more fluid that you drink, if you're not replacing those electrolytes within your diet, and you're not salting your meals enough, you can find that your performance actually goes down a little bit there too, just because you're a bit slightly dehydrated. So you can drink too much water if you're not replacing those electrolytes. So I like to keep it very similar to where people normally are. 9 times out of 10, if someone signs up with this, they're probably only drinking like maybe a liter a day. They're not really conscious of it. I sort of like to titrate that up to closer to probably 2 or 3 or even 4 liters a day. Now, keep in mind, this is also cumulative fluid. I'm not including fluid that's coming from meals. I'm talking fluid, obviously coming from coffees, from diet soft drinks, from actual water intake. If you're sort of just you're drinking somewhere between 2 to 4 liters cumulative a day, I think that's a pretty good range to sit within.
Yeah, sick, sick. And what about fiber?
Yeah, so fiber is another good one, right? And we touched on the importance of obviously food quality. And I think different types of fiber are obviously quite important as well. So I know I obviously touched on soluble, insoluble. You probably want a pretty good mix between both. So obviously with fiber intake, you'll probably notice this just generally come up the better your nutrient selection gets, right? Like obviously the more fruit and vegetables that you're consuming, and quality starchy carbohydrates, potatoes, sweet potatoes, things like that, you will notice your fiber intake come up. But it definitely does contribute to obviously fullness as well. So I like probably somewhere around the ballpark of like 10 to 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories consumed. But you'll probably find that just naturally, obviously wanting to be fuller in terms of your meals and just your food selection changing over the course of a diet, that you will find that you'll be, your fiber intake will probably creep up to like 30, 35, even 40 in some cases. I would say that's probably a pretty good range for most people. You just have to sort of be careful as well, because you don't want to go too far the other way, right? Like, I've known some clients over the years, and this is why it's important to have education around this at the beginning, is they'll be like, okay, I can eat, they think, oh, it's fantastic. Look at the low calories in all of these fruits and vegetables. And then they go way over the top and they're consuming like 2-3 kilos cumulative of fruit and veg each day just to try and keep full. You do have to accept there's going to be an element of hunger that you should not run from in a dieting process. And also as well, you can also fuck your digestive tract. Like if you're putting so much like sort of through it in terms of, the fruit and the vegetables and stuff, that's going to sort of clog up your digestive system a bit as well. So you don't want to be, you don't want to have too much, you don't want to have too little. You sort of want to be in that sweet spot. Because you'll notice it a lot when someone's at the end of a diet and their digestion is quite bad. You'll notice that they're obviously eating a hell of a lot of vegetables. And obviously one thing we do when we're peaking clients for shows is we actually take out a lot of those foods. Just obviously because it can cause a bit of bloating and a bit of stomach distress. So it's a good idea to not go too crazy with it. I think you want to keep it pretty modest.
Yeah, sick. I agree. I've got two camps. Like with a lot of our clients, that is definitely a situation that we face, like to the too much thing. And then there's another camp of people that don't get enough because they just don't eat enough vegetables and stuff like that. And that's the point where I'll probably, I mean, if we can't fix up the nutrition just organically, then maybe just adding in a fiber supplement, I find tends to help a lot.
But what are you a fan of? I quite like Metamucil is good. Benny fiber is good. If Metamucil doesn't feel good, but the main ingredient there, or the main ingredient is psyllium husk.
Yeah.
Right. I think that somewhere between sort of 4 and 6 grams a day, or even every other day, can work wonders for your digestive system.
100%. It helps a lot with a lot of my clients. When they get about 6 weeks into their fat loss phase, I often get reports that their kind of digestion has slowed down and they're sometimes feeling a little bit constipated. So we try to then intervene with obviously getting more fiber through their natural nutrition. But I find that adding in a supplement helps straight away, pretty much. Like they're able to start going to the toilet quite regularly just from like that 4 to 6 grams or whatever it is. I just usually just start them off on one serving and just see how they feel. Often that's enough.
Just be careful too, because if you do go over the top with it, I had a client who started on like, I don't think he realized that he bought actually psyllium husk, and he's like, oh yeah, I just chucked in 10 grams. And I was like, bro, that's probably a bit much. The next week he's like, bro, I had the worst diarrhea. Like I was shitting myself. So you just got to be careful to again, like everything, titrate to effect.
Yeah.
You want to start off with minimal dose, and then if you need to add a little bit more, add a little bit more, but you don't need to go crazy with it.
Yeah, exactly. And just to round out this topic, I want to touch on the effects of training in fat loss and because I think, look, a lot of people do. Look, they want to lose weight. They start running. They start going to these classes, F45, all this bullshit. So, what what sort of training should a person be doing when they're trying to lose fat efficiently and make the process easier, in your opinion?
So I think the absolute last thing you want to do is throw a ton of like demanding energy expenditure at someone. So whether it's like a class or whether it's just doing a shit ton of cardio, right? Like I think we want to be trying to do this from the most. I think stress is very very underrated, a very very underrated thing when it comes to obviously fat loss outcomes, right? We want to try and keep stress as low as possible. So we really just want to be grabbing sort of that low hanging fruit to start with, right? Like what's going to be the number one activity that I can do, which is going to retain my muscle and not impact my appetite, right? And that's going to be weight training. So we definitely want to be having, some form of weight training in there, anywhere between sort of 3 and 6 days per week. I think is a pretty good range for most people. And ensuring again that we're obviously tracking our weights and that we're not, regressing too much, obviously in strength. But just keep in mind, like, yes, there will come a time if you are at the back end of the fat loss phase. It's not to say this for everyone, but cardio may be required. We also do like to sort of monitor energy output via sort of steps, more or less just to sort of keep an eye on that. Because if, obviously steps come down, as you tend to obviously get more and more hungry, your body will want to conserve energy. So we want to just try and keep that as consistent as possible. The last thing we want to do is like chuck in a lot of 45-minute, 60-minute classes where you're burning through a lot of calories, because that activity becomes very, very, what's the word? It sort of becomes very, very, your body becomes very, very used to it over time, right? So like the last thing that we want to do is do something like that where number one, we're driving up appetite. Number two, it's not doing anything to retain muscle really. And unless of course you're someone that doesn't weight train at all, in which case then yeah, it's going to be a novel stimulus. But the fastest way to obviously lose body fat is having weight training in place and then just creating a moderate calorie deficit through food. And then monitoring your steps, right? And then again, like I said before, with the diet, with the fiber supplement, you want to titrate to effect. I think you can just set your training as long as you've got a good training program that's in place. If you set that, then you can just set your steps exactly where they are, right? And the good thing with steps is they're very low impact. So the only thing that sort of is a bit of a trade-off there is if you're a busy person and I don't know, maybe you're working significant hours of the week and you look at your watch and it's like, oh, I'm only doing 3,000 steps a day, right? I always give my clients a choice. I say to them often, we've got two choices here, right? They say, okay, coach, I can't get over 6,000 steps a day no matter what I do. Okay, in that instance, we are probably going to have to substitute some of those calories for cardio, right? Or they can take their food lower, or we can do a slight combination of both. I give them that choice because some people actually quite enjoy doing cardio. Some people absolutely hate it. So you have to understand which you probably hate less, right? Which you hate less. Do you want to rather take your food a little bit lower but keep your output lower? Or do you want to be able to eat a bit more food and take your output slightly higher? But when I say output, when we are actually prescribing cardio, like it's never really going to be, unless it's obviously for cardiovascular benefits, like we're not really going to be doing HIIT. It's going to be more low intensity, steady state sort of cardio where we're just trying to burn through calories, right? And what we don't want is obviously your heart rate to be getting too high, right? So if you're on a bike and you're cranking along and your heart rate's at 180 beats per minute, that's way too high. You're carrying way too much fatigue that's taking away from your weight training. We really only want to be doing something that's probably going to keep that heart rate sort of between 110 to 130 beats per minute max, and just sit between that range for a good 20 to 30 minutes. And again, start nice and low. 2 sessions, maybe out of third, maybe out of fourth. You have to understand what sort of calorie burn are you getting from that, and then how much is that then going to take away? Because the reality is, once you actually realize how much 300 calories is, right? Like that might only be like 30 minutes of cardio, but that's really not much when you take it and factor it into your average for the week for 2 days. So again, when it comes to cardio, we just want to make sure that we're not overdoing it. But we have to understand which type of person that you are, with being like a worker that sits at a desk all day, or if you're like working at an active job, like on a job site, or you're a concreter or something where your output's really high. Like if that the concreter, he probably is never going to have to do any cardio because his steps and his output is so high.
100%, 100%. I think the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to drop body fat is they just start to it's the same thing as the nutrition thing, right? They just try to they want to go as hard as possible, so they increase energy output. They start doing these fucking classes, they start going out doing running and all this other stuff, and they focus their training on just burning as many calories as possible. and you're just shooting yourself in the foot because number one, you're just driving your appetite through the roof. So you're just going to feel hungry all the time and most likely overeat when it comes
And that
to.
might feel good at the beginning, right? Like you might be like the first 2 weeks, this is great, my appetite's up, the scale weight's shifting. But when we hit week 4 or week 6 and it gets real low real quick, you're going to run into a fucking world of hurt.
100%. And yeah, your body's just going to start to adapt to that very quickly. I think if the goal is fat loss and the goal is looking muscular and looking better, then your training needs to be focused on building and maintaining muscle. And then your nutrition and your low level activity like steps and stuff like that is there to kind of make the fat loss happen. When you're in the gym, you shouldn't be just pushing yourself to be in a sweaty mess on the floor at the end of your session. That's not an indicator of you having a good session or you accelerating the fat loss process. You're probably just doing more harm than good. Like you said, you're driving up fatigue, you're driving up hunger, you're making the nutrition part of it a lot harder on yourself because you're going to be feeling a lot hungrier throughout the day because you're burning all this energy. And a lot of the time people will they'll go do these classes or whatever, and they don't really take into consideration the whole day of energy expenditure. So because they've had this huge fucking sweaty session in the morning, they just don't do much for the rest of the day because
They're sitting at the desk or they're sitting at the couch, right?
yeah, so your body kind of just finds that equilibrium and you end up burning a similar amount of calories, but you're driving up fatigue. And if you're not doing the necessary kind of like weight training program that you should be doing, you're most likely just losing lean mass while you're losing the weight. So your body composition is going to be much worse off. So I think it's really important to first and foremost get your weight training program structured correctly. That's your priority when you're in the gym. If you're foregoing that stuff to go to an F45 class or go for a run, you've got things backwards. You shouldn't be focusing on output and burning as many calories, working up a sweat. Prioritize your weight training, building strength, building muscle within your sessions, getting yourself into a calorie deficit with all the stuff that we've just mentioned in terms of structuring your diet correctly so it's really easy to follow, and then adding some low impact activity like you said on top of that in the form of steps, which is not going to make you hungry. If you go for a walk for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, because it's just such a low intensity activity, um, you're not going to feel the same hunger as if you fucking doing, a circuit of hit fucking exercises for 45 minutes. This is where I think a lot of people run into issues. And I think this is like you know, the message that a lot of these just idiots put forward with, hit being this kind of like fat loss fucking wonder. Yeah, a lot of people run into issues doing that.
And just with the rest periods, like we're touching on, make sure you're resting long enough within your training program. Because if it's like, oh yeah, you'll see the guy, he's got his watch on, he's like, oh yeah, I rested a minute between that. I got my workout done in like 45 minutes, man. Like it was so good. I'm like, mate, your performance is getting shitter and shitter each week. You felt like you were working hard, but your numbers are going down. Like you need to make sure you are resting, 2, 3, probably 3.5 minutes on some of those bigger compound movements. We're not just in here to just fucking, otherwise you might as well be at F45. Make sure your rest periods are longer and they're, you're not going back in too quickly.
100%, 100%. All right, let's move on to some Q&A, bro. We've got lots of questions here. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Number one. This is actually a question I got yesterday from a client. And this is one of your questions, but it's also a question that I got yesterday from one of my clients as well. So, best carb powder to use during a workout. So we did kind of touch on intra-workout nutrition before. What are your favorite carb powders to use during training?
Remember the old school Vitago?
Oh yeah. What is that? That's potato starch? What was that?
I can't remember. It was some sort of fucking dextrose.
I think it was some sort of starch because we used to use back in the day. We used to use it was like starch. There was like a phase where everyone was using, pretty sure it was potato starch for ages. Like it was like a thing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Vitago used to be so popular, bro.
Oh, it was. And it was so expensive really for what it was. You know what I mean? Like I thought it was going to turn me into Ronnie Coleman. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler used Vitago, so I'm going to get some Vitago as well. When I would go down to the local sub store and you know, get all the goodies that they would try and sell you over the counter. But look, to be fair, like, it doesn't need to be anything crazily expensive. Obviously, if you're trying to get in an extra, I'd say firstly, look at your daily carbohydrate intake. And then, you know, obviously this guy sounds like he's obviously pushing his carbs up, and he's obviously in a bit of a gaining phase.
Yeah.
I would say you probably want to be opting for somewhere between 30 to 70 grams of carbs into your workout, depending on how big you are. And it just works as another effective way of getting in like a good amount of carbohydrates, like a really good bolus of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
That you don't then obviously have to have in other meals. And obviously, because it's liquid form as well, it's going to, you know, digest and absorb very quickly. So I'm more of a fan of just a normal Gatorade, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like just a Gatorade, because again, as well, like I touched on with the electrolyte balance there as well, like you're getting, you know, a decent amount of sodium, potassium in as well, which I think is just as important to fuel your intra-workout sessions as well. It's not to say there's good electrolyte formulas. I personally don't really like to use carb powders per se. I'd much prefer just like a basic glucose solution with some electrolytes. So a Gatorade, a Powerade, even just like a pump or a hydration product can also work very well. But you know, there's also nothing wrong with just having like 50 grams of carbs from Sour Patch Kids or some snakes as well. It's
Well,
cheaper.
That's the question I've got coming up.
Yeah, it's going to save you a lot of money, and you know, rather than spending $70 on like a fucking box of just you know shit, it's not really gonna do too much outside of just giving. You could make the argument, you know, highly branched 6-week dextrin is pretty easily digesting for a lot of people, but I just couldn't be bothered, like, you know, trying to order that in and all that rest. So when you can just go down to Woolies and grab yourself, you know, a packet of snakes, you know,
Yeah.
or a
Yeah. Well, I just looked up Vitago. Vitago now, I think it's something different, but it's fraction barley amylopectin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think, look, there's so many things out there. There's so many fucking expensive, like you said, like cyclic dextrin is expensive, dude. And I think if you don't,
A lot of them taste absolutely terrible. You know what I mean? Like, how many of you tasted that just taste fucking horrible?
yeah. I think if you don't have any trouble digesting just glucose or maltodextrin or yeah, like literally like a fucking Gatorade or whatever, then there's no need to use anything like more, you know, like cyclic dextrin or something like that. Maybe if you're having trouble digesting that sort of stuff, maybe cyclic dextrin will kind of be a little bit easier on the gastric system. But for the fucking price, dude,
It's not worth it. You know what I mean?
not
Like,
worth
I
it.
would sooner see someone just mix some fucking coconut water and some Gatorade together, and boom, you're done.
Yeah,
Easy.
100%. All right, sick. Um, Testosterone to estrogen ratio. I see it talked about sometimes, but not in depth on what it should be, or if lower slash higher, what symptoms etc.
Yeah, so obviously with the testosterone estrogen ratio, there's going to be massive variation, massive individual variation, right? Like, it's impossible to say that this range is going to be perfect for everyone. I think that obviously when it comes to estrogen, there's a few things you can start to notice. We know that when it comes to estrogen, and I'm assuming you're talking about, you know, if it's just a normal testosterone estrogen ratio from a natural person versus someone over there that's taking, you know, PEDs, it's going to be a bit different. So I'm assuming this question is in relation to someone who's obviously taking PEDs, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be seeing, you wouldn't have to worry about this much, because it's not going to change much over your life.
Yeah.
But for someone that's obviously taking PEDs, you definitely will notice a big bell curve of response for different people. So, well, we know estrogen does have a number of positive effects within the body, but again, we probably don't want to be taking this too high, right? So some of the things I would say, you know, just the basic things you notice when estrogen is too high is, you know, are you presenting with any gynecomastic side effects, any mood changes, any erectile dysfunction? Because, you know, when estrogen is obviously really high, you can notice a lot of those things. But obviously about it being too low, and obviously not having, you know, obviously if it is too low and someone's using supplemental testosterone, then, you know, you're probably going to be, someone's going to be using aromatase inhibitors and things of that nature to sort of crush, you know, E2. So I definitely think that there is no
Which
such
can
thing.
also have similar effects, right? Like erectile dysfunction if you don't have enough, if it's like, you know, too low, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it's not something, again, this is going to be something you're going to have to dictate from your own blood work and also based on your individual response, right, as well, because, again, we don't really know because, look, to be fair, a lot of the research when it comes to high estrogen, it's not really viable to be done because, well, number one, PEDs are in the most case at those doses which bodybuilders tend to use, it's illegal for starters, right? So it's impossible to put actual numbers on this outside of what you're currently experiencing. But I will say that, it does definitely seem to benefit as well because there's some really good nutrient partitioning effects, particularly with glucose, that do come from having higher estrogen in play. But again, it's sort of like a bell curve. It's like if you're somewhere within this range, you're probably good. If you're too low, it's shit. If you're too high, it's obviously shit as well.
Okay, good. How far can you push a gaining phase before you cut? This is actually a common question I get too.
Yeah, get this one heaps. So how far can you push a gaining phase before you cut? So you can come at this from a number of different ways. I think that obviously the younger you are, look, I think we're both of the opinion of this, and we've probably both done the dreamer bulks a bit, when we were younger as well. Like, yeah. I think it's far overblown to a degree where it's like, oh, don't get over X amount of body fat, or you will start getting fat. Oh, sorry, you will obviously, you have to end your gaining phase. You're not going to be growing any muscle, right? But there is definitely a certain point in that growth phase where you feel sluggish, your nutrients are not digesting well enough, you're eating so much food that your stomach is not absorbing a lot of the nutrients. You might suffer with some bloating. I think a good one as well, right, is if you're actually pushing food up and you go into the gym and you feel like your performance in the gym is actually getting worse, what is the point of having those additional calories in play? Just to see your body weight go up. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between obviously putting on muscle mass and just seeing body weight go up. So I think that it's a very difficult one to answer because, again, I think mostly if we just look at it and try and boil it down to a basic phase, I think you can probably gain anywhere from 6 months to probably a year and a half in some cases. I think the more advanced you are, probably the more benefit there is to probably staying a little bit on the leaner side, and then maybe mini cutting a little bit more frequently, just because you're already closer to like the amount of muscle potential, I guess, that you already have and that you've already put on. So it probably doesn't make the most sense. You've probably built the base physique. You've got a lot of the base muscle that you've already put on. But if you're a bit younger, I'm not opposed to people just getting a little bit, on the fatter side in the pursuit of obviously that. Because again, when you are younger, you have the more potential to put on, more muscle mass than when you're a little bit older as well, just because, you're new to training as well. So I'd rather see those gaining phases go a little bit longer rather than just, stop it there. You know what I mean?
100%. I think when it comes to gaining phases, it's very person dependent. I think some people can get away with being leaner through a gaining phase, but other people need to put on a little bit more padding in order to perform better in the gym. I know for myself, like if I'm too lean, if I'm trying to keep my body too lean, even if my calories are, reasonably decent, I still don't have that performance in the gym. Whereas if I put 5-6 kilos on, I'm in the gym and I just fucking feel amazing, dude. So it's just like finding that sweet spot for yourself where you perform really well. And then I think kind of trying to stay there and just kind of like marginally increase your weight over a period of time. And like with a lot of my clients, I'll get them to a point, and as soon as I start to see their weight trending up at the rate that I want, a lot of the time I'll leave them there for a long period of time. Whereas
just for like 6, 8, maybe even 10 weeks in some cases.
Yeah, well, in the earlier in my coaching days, I would always keep pushing the calories up, but I quickly learned that the body composition, like you're just increasing calories for the sake of it, and the body composition is actually getting worse. So now I pretty much push them as high as possible, and as soon as I start to see, that a kilo a month or 1% of their body weight coming on a month, I pretty much just leave it there, and I'll leave it there unless that rate slows below what I want or flatlines, and then I'll make another adjustment. And a lot of the time, like I've got a couple of clients that are in gaining phases now, and we haven't really touched their calories in 6-8 weeks because they're increasing at the rate that I want, and adding calories at that point, it's just not needed. Like there's no point. There's only going to be negative effects from pushing the calories up and in terms of making their body composition worse. So if they're because I'm looking at their waist measurement as well a lot of the time in these gaining phases, and if that's staying in a relatively good area and their weight is increasing at the rate that I want and they're feeling good in the gym, then why are we moving up for? It's just going to increase the waist measurement. It's going to increase body fat, and a lot of the time, performance. What you'll find is, like you said, when you start to add in too many calories, often you get a decline in performance just because they feel so sluggish and stuff like that. So you don't want to stay super lean. I think some people are obsessed with trying to stay as lean as possible through their gaining phase, and um, that's not always the best move. You want to put on a little bit of body fat because often most people will perform much better with a bit more body fat on. And I think a lot of people tr- they have a very short term mindset around gaining. If you're especially if you're natural and you're trying to gain muscle, like
12 weeks. Let's get after it. Let's fucking go hard for 12 weeks, And
yeah,
that's
well,
it.
it's just like, well, we'll do a gaining phase for 12 weeks, but it's like, yeah, but when you cut again, you're not going to really look any different because what's 3 months? How
Nothing.
much muscle, how much actual tissue? You might even go up, say you go up 3 kilos in 3 months. On the back end of that, when you diet the body fat off, how much of that are you going to actually have at the end?
It's probably going to be like negligible change. I think the only thing I would add to that is obviously genetic potential does play a role here as well. Like some people, like say Dill, for example, you remember
Mm,
the transformation we put up with Dylan? Like we're probably edging on the side of more aggressive in terms of what I would normally add with someone because he adds muscle so quickly.
yeah, yeah.
So if you're someone that adds muscle very fast, you could probably stand to go a little bit more aggressive with your surplus because again, his visuals are improving and he's
Mm.
obviously clearly putting on muscle mass, but his body fat's not changing
Using
or
the
all that
calories.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's maybe not as genetically gifted, and you put on muscle a bit slower, you're going to have to take the diet a little bit slower, the surplus a little bit slower as well.
100%. And I've got clients on both sides of those fences, and you need to be able to know what's going on. And then the people with the little bit worse genetics, they're kind of always asking questions like, oh, why am I not? People have
I don't know, look like expert
expectations for
or
themselves, like they compare themselves to other people. It's like, dude, you just don't gain muscle that quickly. Like you just got to take your time and
you have to accept the hand that you're dealt. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's why just picking randomly what some influencer does online is probably not going to work for you because 9 times out of 10, if they've probably got a lot of views, they've got a great physique. The reality is they're probably going to get to where they got in spite of how they got there.
100%, 100%. It's so true. And yeah, I think just having a look for us, we had this conversation yesterday on the phone because you're obviously competing and next year, but I'm helping you with that. But we spoke about this gaining phase that's coming up for you, and I think it's like you need to take into account what is planned in the future. So for yourself, we're going to go into like a 3 month gaining phase before your actual fat loss phase starts for your comp. And because we're going into this 3 month gaining phase and we know that we're going to be going into a prep straight after that, it doesn't make sense to lose control of like your body composition just to gain a little bit of muscle because then the prep is going to have to be longer. You're going to have to get more body fat off. So I think if you have something coming up, a photo shoot, whatever it is, and you have a timeline that you need to stick to, then keeping the body composition in relatively good check makes sense. If you don't, and you just need to gain, a fair bit of muscle, and this is going to be like a main kind of gaining phase for yourself where you want to make some big improvements. Um, man, you need to accept a long gaining phase. I get
And
this.
that's what we discussed, right? Like how much is 12 weeks really going to improve if I'm putting on like a kilo a week? You know what I mean? Like, sure, there's going to be a little bit of muscle mass there, but it's not worth it. It's worth me staying obviously on the leaner side, slowly titrating food up like we spoke about. And then I'm in a much better starting position for when we do begin prep rather than just like, okay, we've just gone through a mini cut. Now I've put on fucking 10 kilos just so I could say, oh, I'm like 110 kilos.
Yeah.
But my positioning to actually start the prep is far, far worse because I've just put on so much fat so quickly.
Yeah. And I think like, I get this question a lot, dude. Like this is one of the main questions I get is like, how long should I be in a gaining phase for? Do I need to do mini cuts? Do I need to, um, can I be in a gaining phase for too long? And I think a lot of the time people mess up their gaining phases because they see a little bit of body fat come on and they want to do a mini cut, and then that takes fucking 8 to 12 weeks, and then you know what I mean? That's 8 to 12 weeks that they're not gaining for, and then they got to go back into the gaining phase, and it just prolongs the process. So I think if you're calculated with your gaining phase, and from the outset you don't try to go too hard, you don't accumulate too much body fat the whole time by just keeping your calories in check and making sure you're hitting your markers each month for rate of gain, and that's not kind of spiking up too much, and you're not kind of getting carried away with that, then you are able to extend that gaining phase as far as possible, 12 months, 24 months, whatever it is, and just have quality the whole time. Like that whole time you're in a
Great point. Quality is such a good point because the longer you're able to stay in a gaining phase, the more muscle you've got to put on. If you have to keep mini cutting every 16 weeks because you got too fat too quick because your surplus was too heavy, that's like you've taken an extra 6 weeks out of this gaining phase. Now you've lost 6 weeks of the year because you have to mini cut. So I think understanding, yes, you look better when you're mini cutting, but you're not making progress while you're mini cutting. You're not actually adding muscle mass while you're mini cutting. You're adding it when you're fucking in that growth phase, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to be trying to extend that out for an extended time frame or as long as you can, while still seeing obviously the rate of improvement on the scale each week.
Yeah. Do you? So I think that the signs of a good gaining phase is that you don't need to do mini cuts very frequently.
Yeah, definitely.
I think if you're finding that you're mini cutting every 3 to 6 months, then there's something wrong with how you're setting up the gaining phase.
I definitely think sometimes too people will take it too far. They'll like, obviously the higher your calories get, the looser you get, the more free meals that come in. You know what I mean? Like, and before you know it, you've just put on way too much body fat. And again, the more body fat you put on, unfortunately, the longer it takes to get back off again. So you really need to strike a good sweet spot there, I think.
Yeah. And you also don't need to have a ton of excess calories to gain muscle as well. Like a slight surplus will yield some good results. And then if you need more, you add more, but you don't there's no, like, I think some people just have this outlook that they every week or every fortnight they need to add calories into their diet because
it's just more or less to feel like they're doing something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. They feel like their plan's not
just
changing. Yeah, 100%. Eating 500 plus grams of carbs to fuel lifting and running, but experiencing digestive issues, constipation, gassy. Thoughts on what I should do differently?
So this is great because it's actually sort of ties into what we spoke about in terms of, you have some clients that when they get into a diet, they sort of have digestive issues. It can also go the other way. If you're in a gaining phase and, obviously you're eating a shit ton of carbohydrates, well, I think firstly we have to look at, okay, where's fiber? Where's fiber? Where is fluid? And then also the sources of carbohydrates that are coming in. Like, are you eating something that, doesn't agree with you? Or are you eating so much, like potato, for example, that it's causing digestive problems? So I think you really have to look at your carbohydrate intake and also just ensure you're eating enough fruit and vegetables too, because it's often the case when, you're 500 plus grams of carbs a day, you feel never hungry. Therefore, the first things to go are your fruit and vegetable intake, which drastically reduces your fiber and then obviously limits gastric motility of those carbohydrates through the digestive system. So I definitely think just going through everything there would be probably your best bet. Obviously, you can see the addition of a fiber supplement like we sort of touched in there as well. But I think you really have to just find what the underpinnings are there too, because it could also be trying to mix two things together. Is your stress so high that it's also causing digestive problems?
Yeah. It's all intertwined, isn't it? I even know for myself, just because as you know, I was pretty sick last week, and I've just had no appetite. Right. And the first thing to go was like the vegetables and all the fiber stuff, just so I could actually get something in without feeling like vomiting. So I think it's kind of similar to this is like when you have that many carbs, like you said, your appetite goes out the window. You never actually feel like eating. Um, so you do tend to gravitate towards simpler things to eat that are more calorie dense, and that can often, yeah, lead to you not getting enough fiber in and not getting enough even just like nutrients in. So um, yeah, it's quite an important thing to kind of consider, I think. All right, let's do a few more. We'll do 3 or 4 more. Let me just pull up our other question sources here. Where is it? All right. Okay. So why do roid heads give the worst advice, bro?
Look, I think for 9 times out of 10, people that obviously gravitate towards anabolics in the first place, they're probably not the sharpest tools in the shed, right? You're doing something to yourself that you're obviously knowingly harming your health and obviously your long-term health and risk of everything. And obviously, people that tend to do that, they don't tend to be the most intelligent sorts of people. Again, not all cases, but that is a large majority of the population that sort of go down that route. So I think as well, one of the things that with anabolics is it can make up for a lot of the shortcomings in someone's training and nutrition,
Yeah.
right? So often, even if there's not necessarily like a good training program in place, they just go and train hard, or they don't even need to eat well, right? Like you look at the likes of like a Sam Sulek, for example, before all his fanboys start to come at us, right? His diet is fucking abysmal. Let's be real. Like if you're filling your diets with Krispy Kremes and cinnamon toast crunch, and that's just all you're eating, and there's not really any substance to the actual food that you're eating, you're getting results in spite of what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like these things are so powerful that you will get results no matter what you're doing. So unfortunately, people tend to listen to people who look the best, not necessarily who are actually the most intelligent at giving people results. You know what I mean? So they're getting results in spite of what they're doing, and the gear is making up for a lot of the shortcomings that they're actually doing in their own training and nutrition.
Yeah,
And you'd
100%.
find if they didn't have the gear, they wouldn't be making any progress at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think like a lot of the time, these kind of like quote unquote roid heads that we're talking about here are people who never really trained naturally, got results naturally. They just jump straight on the source, and yeah, it's not that what they're doing is working so well. It's just that the gear is giving them results
They just up the dose, bro. That's all they do. It's like, oh,
despite
hit a
what they're
plateau.
doing.
Don't worry about what my protein intake is or my carbohydrate intake or my actual training program and am I progressing. It's okay, let's go from 500 tests to 750 tests, or let's add in some tren, or let's add in some mastron. You know what I mean? So it's not a case of what they're actually doing. It's unfortunately it's then typically not the sharpest tools in the shed either.
Yeah, so people see them growing at a rapid rate in the gym, then they go and ask them a few questions, and then that roid head in the gym, you know, tells them what they're doing, but it's not that what they're doing is getting them the result. It's that they could pretty much do anything and get a really good result because they're just growing on another level due to being on anabolics. So
The question you should be asking is what have you done for other people,
yeah,
not what have you done for yourself. It's show me the results that you've got and the transformations you've got from what you've done for other people. If
yeah,
they can show you that and they can show you actual proof of, and as well, not just other guys that are enhanced, guys that are natural too. I think that's the marker of a good coach, is someone that can get results with naturals at a really high level.
I agree. I agree. If you can't do it with someone that's natural, then you pretty much don't know what you're doing. Using lollies for pre-workout carbs when calories are super high, is that a good idea?
I would rather see the mollies probably come in intra workout. I still think that, again, like we touched on, the absorption of glucose, like you might find you taking those carbs, if again, maybe if you have a protein shake with them as well, it might be a bit of a different story. And maybe some fat as well to sort of slow the digestion, so you've got a steady release of energy through your session. But if you're just having a handful of snakes before you go and train, you're probably going to find you feel just terrible, right? And your body's just processed those carbohydrates so quickly and you're feeling that sugar hit and then a big crash. So the last thing you want to do is have that big hit and crash. You probably want to have some complex carbohydrates sort of pre-workout, like we said before, oats or even some chicken and rice and some, some fat in there to sort of slow the digestion down, like avocado or something like that, rather than just having a handful of snakes and going to train, because you'll be very up and you'll be very down very quickly.
Yeah, I think what Sandy's saying here is, I'm assuming he's having his normal pre-workout meal hour before the gym, whatever, and then maybe when he gets kind of into the gym, he's having a handful of lollies just to kind of up the carbs, which is, yeah, I mean, whether you have it right before intra, I mean, I think it's kind of not a
What
huge.
matters is what you still have in your system, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're just taking the glucose in, if let's say if you're training first thing in the morning, you've been fasting for 8 hours while you're asleep, you have a handful of snakes, yeah, you're probably going to feel like shit. So you're probably better off opting even for something like, even like a banana or something, a banana and some rice cakes and a protein shake, right? That way you've got a little bit of, different pathways there of digestion absorption, and you'll be feeling a lot better and more sustained energy throughout your workout.
yeah, exactly. Um, just lost 10 kilos now, pregnant. How to keep losing while growing a baby. Aim is 10 more.
Um, Look, to be honest, I probably don't think that's the best idea. When it comes to sort of, growing a fetus, and, obviously it requires nutrients as well, So I think, it's probably not a good idea to get out of shape, but you probably don't really want to be continuing to push fat loss. I would just be trying to sort of maintain weight, or, eat comfortably so that you've got an abundance of nutrients coming in, that are not going to really affect the baby's development. So I think it's probably a better idea to just stop dieting and just focus on what's best for the baby, in my opinion.
Does a calorie deficit affect the baby? I'm
I would,
asking because I got no clue.
yeah, well, you'd have to think so, right? Because it depends on how big of a deficit it is and how much fat's coming off. But if you're obviously lacking nutrition in terms of nutrients, and likely if you were to put all this through chrono, you're lacking in certain minerals and vitamins, etc., then you do have the potential to impact, because obviously the baby is, metabolizing its food through you.
Yeah.
So obviously all its nutrients are coming in from what you're consuming, and if you're not consuming enough food for it, and have an environment that's conducive to being able to grow a fetus, then it's probably not going to be the best thing for the baby. So it's probably one of those things where it's impossible to answer one way or the other. But I definitely think that going into a big deficit and continuing to lose fat is probably not the best idea.
And it also
Just wait
becomes so hard to track as well, because you got something growing
Well,
in.
exactly right. The baby's growing, so your weight's probably going to be increasing anyway. Therefore, it's pretty hard to know exactly what's going on. So why not just wait until you've had the child and then lose the fat after?
Yeah. I mean,
You want to be taking risks, you know what I mean? Like, do you really want to be taking any sort of risk with your child?
yeah, I think I think just trying to follow something like that while, you're having crazy hunger signals, all that sort of stuff,
Or
maybe.
like the hormonal imbalances as well. Like we you've been around pregnant women, sort of how crazy they can be, or some of the
What you
cravings they
say,
can.
Chris, watch what you say. Nah, but I agree. So I think, yeah, just I would just I would just switch the focus rather than on fat loss. So just train, hit the gym, stay healthy. Don't try to restrict yourself. Sorry,
Eat when you're hungry.
and eat
Just
when
eat
you're
when you're
hungry.
hungry.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's do two more. Um, diet breaks. So should I be doing diet breaks or just go all the way in a cutting phase?
I definitely think this depends on how much fat you have to take off, right? If you're someone that's got to take off 40 kilos, like say Sishan, right? Remember
Mhm.
Sishan?
Yeah, yeah.
I've taken him through multiple diet breaks, because we've literally started like 110 and he's like 70 kilos now. So we've taken off like 40 kilos. So it would be impractical to take all that off in one go,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to, managing such a big amount of weight that needs to come off. You're going to go through periods where you're going to have to fuel back up a little bit, and just because it is such a drastic amount to come off. But if you're like only trying to take off maybe 10 kilos, look, the rule I tend to follow is if you are dieting and you've been going pretty aggressive and you've lost a significant amount over like 8 weeks, I would probably look to have 8 to 10 weeks. I'd probably look to maybe have a little bit of a diet break. You can combine that with a deload from training as well, and that uses it's a pretty good like little stepping stone into your next phase. If you're someone that's only going to lose like 5 kilos or even 7, I'd probably just keep smashing all the way through, to be honest, because the more diet breaks that you take, unfortunately, you know, they don't really have that much of an impact on fat loss per se, but psychologically they can have a very positive impact. But the last thing you want to do is, if you're cranking along well and you've only got 5-7 kilos to take off, is you're feeling great, you want to take a week off and have a diet break, and it sort of kills the momentum a little bit. So I think with fat loss, momentum is also a really important factor here. So yeah, I reckon every 8 to 10 weeks, I'd probably look into action a diet break, provided that you have been probably losing around about a kilo a week, or even 800 grams to a kilo a week. Maybe a little bit less for like a female. And also depending on how the person's feeling too. Some people just can't handle being in big deficits for long periods of time.
Yeah. When it comes to diet breaks, I'm usually, when it comes to diet breaks, it's going to depend on how much fat that person needs to lose. If you're someone that needs to lose 30-40 kilos, it's going to be pretty beneficial to put some diet breaks along the way. And generally,
You know,
yeah,
you literally won't make it.
Yeah, generally for myself, like I'm monitoring how the person's feedback, both like psychologically and what's happening in terms of their rate of loss data, all that sort of stuff. And generally, look, every 8 to 12 kilos, I'm probably going to throw a diet break in there of some sort, just to kind of just help them mentally. Like losing 30-40 kilos straight up is going to be quite hard to do. Um, and it's probably going to require a couple or a few diet breaks along the way just to make the whole process easier. If you only have 5 to 8 kilos to lose, you can probably just do that all in one hit. But yeah, if you got more to lose, you probably don't need to. There's no benefit. I don't think there's any benefit in throwing in diet breaks if you've got, like 5 to 8 kilos to lose. It's just not really
No
needed.
point really. You're more or less just, you're killing the momentum that you've built up over those weeks, where you could get something done in 10 weeks. You could be finishing your diet at 10 weeks, then you decide to take a diet break, right? Like you could already be there, you know? So just keep smashing it, get through it. Unless of course you're, losing more than probably 10 kilos, I would say, within that fat loss phase.
Yeah. Um, I'm off to India on Sunday. Any tips on eating?
Oh, honestly, traveling and staying on track at the best of times is very, very difficult. Like even when I went to Europe last year, like it's very, very difficult to get your hands on like even just like a protein shake. You know, here, like you go to a servo, like they've got heaps of protein shakes and just different things that you can choose from. Like while you're traveling, even going through like places like Singapore, like there just isn't anything.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very tough situation to manage. And I would say the number one thing, don't go after you've finished a diet. Um, don't obviously finish your diet and then go. You're probably better off going, while you've been eating in a bit of a surplus for a while. So you've got more calories to play with for starters. Some of the tools that I find really helpful, obviously, while traveling are even just fasting for periods of the day as well. So, if you're going to be going out and having a big dinner, you might skip breakfast, have a bit of a lighter lunch, and then obviously go out and have dinner. Yeah, but again, too, if you are someone that's walking, it depends if you're going for business or you're going for pleasure as well. Because if you're going for work, you're probably going to be Ubering around to different places, so your steps probably going to be pretty low. If you're out sightseeing, like you're going to be probably doing 15, 20,000 steps a day. So your expenditure is going to be so high that it's really not going to matter, that much if you're over consuming just a little bit, because your steps and your output is so high anyway, and you're on your feet most of the day. But it can definitely help just knowing and thinking about your day a little bit more. If it's like, okay, I'm going out to dinner. All right, even if you do decide to have breakfast, opt for something a little bit lighter, maybe some eggs on toast. If you can get maybe like a protein shake, piece of fruit throughout the day. Maybe for lunch, you can, I don't know, find something that's going to be a decent protein source, a little bit of fat, a little bit of carb. But I would try and reduce the amount of meals that I would have. So if I had 4 or 5, I might bring that down to 2 or 3, and maybe a snack throughout the day. That works pretty well.
Yeah, 100%. I usually give my clients this advice. I say, look, if they're going for pleasure, you don't want to be going over there and fucking fretting about, oh, what am I eating? Should I be?
Food, right?
You want to enjoy your time away, but at the same time, you don't want to be a fucking moron and just go crazy and just eat immaturely. So what I usually say to them is, if it's possible, I personally always aim to just skip one meal. So whether that's just like fasting through breakfast or whatever, having one lighter meal throughout the day, and then just having one meal where it's like I eat whatever I want, I drink whatever I want, enjoy myself. And I find that it's just all about behaviors, man. Like you just need to set up your day of eating in a way that's just going to minimize your calorie intake while still maximizing, your time there and enjoying yourself. So not, you don't, if you want to go over there, you want to have a few drinks, you want to have a good time, that, you shouldn't be, you know, overthinking what you're eating and what you're drinking. But it's just when you are there, try to minimize one meal to a smaller meal. If you can, try to skip one meal and then have one meal, whether it be dinner, lunch, whatever's on the cards for that day. That's going to be more of an indulgent meal. Eat whatever you want during that meal, and also just try to prioritize protein in all the meals that you have, because that's gonna take you a long way as well.
If you are going to have alcohol too, just obviously, yeah, you're probably going to want to have a cocktail here and there to celebrate. But the last thing you want to be doing is just drinking like 5, 6, 7 cocktails back to back. Like each one of those is probably 200 or 300 calories a pop. So congratulations, you've eaten your entire daily intake in your cocktail. If you're just going to have one, sure. I think we're probably pretty relatable when we go overseas. We're not the type of people to fucking pack our meals and go to every sort of thing. We want to enjoy ourselves. We want to have a couple of drinks. We want to chill out and relax. So maybe just opt for like, vodka, lime, and sodas are obviously great, 70, 80 calories. Like opt for things that are going to be with like obviously diet mixes. So that way you're not, over consuming on the calories too much. But it's very common, especially women, to like go and put on like 4 or 5 kilos when they go away, because they're drinking espresso martinis like they're fucking water. You know what I mean? Like you need to sort of be a bit sensible and just eat and drink like an adult. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to, it's not an excuse to just absolutely gorge yourself, because the last thing you want to do is remember the experience for how fucking disgusting you felt in terms of like being overly full and drank way too much alcohol and all the rest of it. Like you want to enjoy the experience while you're away too. So
and
I think that's
the more nutrition knowledge you have, then the easier it becomes to just kind of like eyeball foods that you're eating.
And we're not taking scales with us either. You know what I mean? Like we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Better choices, and just eat protein centric meals. And then whatever else comes with that, then that's fine if it's a main meal for you. But you'll be fine. I think the camera's overheating, bro. All right, last one. If I work more muscle groups in a session, do I need more protein, calories to repair, grow?
Oh, I mean, look, to be fair, I think if your protein's pretty much set with some of the ranges that we sort of, spoke about, like say 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, like I think regardless of what the activity that you're doing, that's going to be more than sufficient. Like even us going to 2 grams is like well above, like the literature range is literally like 1.6 to probably 2.2. So even being at 2 or above 2 is way higher than probably where you actually need to be. So you're already pretty much countering off for any activity that you really do. So, and I guess the people that go super, super high on protein, like largely it's probably unnecessary, to be fair. And I think, it's very expensive for one, but two, how much of additional benefit does it make, provided that, you're consuming a lot of high biological value protein sources throughout the day. And it's not, obviously you're not making up your protein intake through like Nutrigrain and things like that, like protein bread and thing. You need a full spectrum amino acid, but 2 grams is more than sufficient. Like you will not need any more than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think whether you're training one muscle group in the gym or 2 muscle groups in the gym in one session doesn't really change your protein requirements or even your calorie requirements, because you're not doing extra volume. You're just splitting up the volume differently. If you're doing 1, 2, or 3 muscle groups in any given session, it shouldn't be that you're adding volume for every muscle group that you're doing. It should be that you're just distributing the volume differently. So your recovery requirements are going to be exactly the same. And I think if you try to push up your calories, your protein too high, then you're not leaving enough room for other key nutrients like fat and carbs. And then those things are going to tend to be undereaten, and that's going to have its own problems in itself. So I think there's no real requirement for increasing anything like that. That's it, Chrissy boy.
That's it. That's good.
First podcast in the bank. If you guys need help with coaching and all that sort of stuff, you can go to our website, strengthlabmelbourne.com.au. You can make an inquiry there and we'll be in touch to help you and get you started. And we'll see you next week.
Episode 2, where we might actually do our actual About Us intros, which we didn't do this time.
Oh, yeah. We'll do our About Us. Also, Follow us on Instagram, StrengthLab AU. What's your Instagram, Chris?
Coach_Chris Black.
Coach_Chris Black, if you want to go follow Chris as well. We'll be back next week with another episode, and I'll also put out a Q&A to do questions on the podcast as well during the week, so we can get some more questions for you guys. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.
Tune in.
Ciao.
And subscribe.